I knew there was something I did wrong. So thank you very much indeed. Good afternoon, young Cal. Welcome to the final meeting of the decision-making meeting of the Housing and Preventing Homelessness portfolio for this municipal year. I'm Darren Sanders. I'm a Liberal Democrat councillor for Baffins, North Milton and South Copner. I'm also the portfolio holder for this particular thing. I've got to start with a risk assessment for the council chamber, which is that everybody's meant to sit. Hi, Scott. Everybody is meant to sit 3 feet or 6 feet apart, and there is space for sanitation. There's plenty of hand sanitizers and wet wipes across the room. If there is a fire alarm, it is going to be real, which means we're all going to have to meet, I understand, by Queen Victoria's statue. I hope that's of some use. Please walk in an orderly fashion. If you do not run. So I'm going to start by introducing everyone else, starting with Anna over here.
Anna Martin, Democratic Services.
That's excellent. And then I'll go front and round. So Cal.
Cal Corkery, Councillor for Charles Dickens Ward and Labour spokesperson for Housing.
Thank you. Maria.
Maria Cole, Residents Consortium.
Thank you. Martin.
Martin Silman, Landlords Association.
Scott.
Councillor Scott Peter Harris, Hillsview Ward and the Conservative spokesperson for Housing.
And then I'll go along from right to left along the middle row. James.
James Hill, Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Building Services.
Thank you.
Merrick Travaskis, IT Business Partner for Housing, Neighbourhoods and Buildings.
Thank you. I'm glad rehearsals worked there. Mered.
Meredith Hughes, Assistant Director for Buildings, Housing, Neighbourhood and Buildings.
Steve Groves, Head of Building Maintenance.
Thank you.
Wayne Layton, Finance Manager.
Mark Fitch, Head of Local Authority Housing.
Paul Mitchell, Manager Ian Gibson Court. Okay.
Patrick Lee, Lead Business Manager Housing.
Therese Rotal, Head of Housing Needs Advice and Support.
Paul Fielding, Assistant Director Housing.
Sam Ricard, Housing Regulations Manager, Private Sector Housing.
Right, thank you all for coming. The next bit is declarations of interest, which affects Cal, Scott and me. Do any of us three have anything interesting to declare? Cal?
Personal interest, and I'm a Portsmouth City Council tenant.
Thank you. Scott, anything?
Nothing.
Okay, and I have a personal interest in that I am a private tenant, although I don't think this affects me, but I believe it is. I'm a private tenant in this. So I'll move to firstly the forward plan emission notice, which effectively is to deal with the council's maintenance and housing IT business software. This has been omitted from the forward plan. James or Mered, any particular reasons why, or was it just something else? Please use your microphone, Mered. Thank you.
Apologies, Councillor Sanders. Not sure how it happened, but it won't happen again.
Okay, I think it was more us. It was us, not housing.
Ooh, I like honesty. This is very good. Thank you, Anna. That's very kind. We try and make sure it's done as much as possible. We know people are very busy. So thank you for that, how it's been done in line with conventional procedures. So now we do move to the Housing Maintenance and Improvements and Housing IT Business Software 2022-2023, otherwise known as the Capital Budget. Who wishes to start on this? Mered?
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. This is the annual report outlining the areas of spend for the HRA housing maintenance and improvements for 2022 and 23, and the HRA's capital spend on IT hardware and software, and Merrick will talk to the IT hardware and software Appendix C in due course. There are 3 recommendations in the report, and that's the area programmes and allocation of finance for repairs and maintenance revenue budgets for dwellings be noted, that the capital budgets in Appendix B and C be approved, and the Director of Housing, Neighbourhood and Buildings proceed with the schemes within the sums approved, and that the financial appraisal, which is the global provision in Appendix B, be approved. The background to the report is that the Housing Investment Programme budget was approved by full council on the 15th of February 2022, and the HRA repairs and maintenance budget were approved at the Housing and Preventing Homelessness Cabinet decision meeting on the 24th of January 2022. The key details of the report are contained in the appendices. and I'll go through them, and then I'll give a bit of background about then what's included in the appendices. So Appendix A is the allocation of revenue budgets totaling £24.5 million, and these identify the various budget headings where the money will be spent in the forthcoming year. Appendix B contains the global financial appraisal and the allocation of the capital budgets against a number of budget headings, and that totals £35,170,000. Appendix D includes the budget plan. Within the budget plan, it includes the revenue and capital summary pages, but also then goes into further detail, and it's a detail that sits behind the budget lines. So it gives reference to the works being undertaken, where the works will be, the blocks, the addresses, and also then the area offices across the city. The proposed works included in the budget plan cover 138 blocks on Portsea Island and across our properties in Paulsgrove, Weacott Farm and Crookhorn, as well as in Havant. And that covers nearly 5,000 individual properties. It doesn't include work such as new kitchens, new bathrooms and heating systems. All of those are on top of those numbers that I've just reported. I think as part of the report I'd like to highlight the continued drive to maintain and improve our properties within the HRA, and highlight the further works within our retrofit, sprinkler and fire door replacement programme, and also investment in energy efficiency and decarbonisation work across the stock. And for an example, I can give you some more detail around that. So that work will include increasing the depths and levels of insulation where we're doing roof replacement on our blocks of flats. It includes adding external insulated render to some of our projects where we've got non-traditional builds. Improved and uprated replacement windows, continuing with the solar panel installs across the stock, LED lighting replacement across the stock in communal areas, electrical rewiring projects, and also we've got a whole property decarbonisation pilot which we're going to kick off in the new year. I mentioned earlier the number of blocks and individual properties that we intend to work on next year, but it also gave me an opportunity to reflect on what we'd managed to achieve in 21-22. It's not something that we haven't really reviewed in previous years and haven't reported in this forum, but I thought that you'd take interest in what we what we completed in terms of what we reported in last year's budget book. So within the budget plan for 2021, we listed, 21-22, we listed 43 different projects, totaling 237 blocks and just over 3,700 properties that would be worked on. Over the year, we've added in some further works as those demands materialised, and some other works were delayed because of reasons of availability of contractors and resources, etc. So as of last week, we completed 23 projects across the last 12 months. A further 23 projects were a work in progress, so these were still in design, out at tender or continuing on site, and 9 projects out of that original number were in delay through limited resources or availability of materials. We completed works to 251 blocks across the estate, and nearly 4,200 properties had been worked on in the last 12 months. That concludes the report on the Council House maintenance improvements, and I'm just going to introduce my colleague Merrick Travaskis, who is the IT business partner for Housing, Neighbourhood and Buildings, and Merrick's going to talk to the IT capital investment in the HRA, and that's detailed in Appendix C of the report.
So you see in the report is broken down into hardware and software elements. So if I run through the 2 hardware elements, so the first one is the contribution towards the cost of replacing public access computers in HRA funded youth and community centres, the Sharps Road Resident Participation Centre and other housing offices around the city. So this upgrade was needed primarily due to the age of the PCs and needing new hardware to run the latest version of Windows to keep the machines as secure as possible, but still accessible to the public and user-friendly. A lot of the machines are used by students or people with limited access to technology to complete online learning and exams at certain places around the city. With the deployment of the new machines, it means this software can be made available to more people in more places, and we can better serve requests from residents for access to other applications of that nature. The second one is the design and plan improvements to the housing CCTV infrastructure. So with the CCTV system we currently have, many of the components in the system are out of support, and the system itself is slightly at risk due to the way we currently host it physically within the civic offices. What we're focusing on here is some initial work to stabilise the system, upgrade and replace those components that are out of support, and then look towards our options for a cloud-hosted system which long-term will give us a more secure, stable platform on which to manage and hopefully expand the service. And from a support perspective, it will reduce our daily running costs to keep the lights on in the system and greatly improve our disaster recovery position in the event of a business continuity incident. Strategically, what we're aiming for is to align the support model between IT and the neighbourhoods team to a more stable position than it is today, and a system design that's aligned to our IT strategy and best practice, whilst the CCTV team retain the ownership and the strategic direction of the system and what they need it to do. So moving down to the software parts. So the first one is supporting the housing team with our options for digitising tenancy files. So these are all currently held on paper at various offices around the city. So the long-term aim is to remove the need for paper altogether if possible, and create a digital library that provides greater availability of those tenancy files at the actual point of service with our residents, and not just physically within the local housing offices. The vision is to build on the back of the work recently completed by the Revs and Bens team for online document management, and look at how we can expand that environment which we already have to serve the housing teams with the same functionality. Next one down is the building management system. So with IT working alongside the BMS team on the next upgrade. So this is primarily driven by the vendor and us needing to upgrade to the latest version. But we're also taking the opportunity to review what we currently have and what small changes we might be able to make as part of upgrading to the vendor's new cloud-hosted platform. This provides us with greater reliability in the system, improved continuity in the event of downtime or critical incidents, and it will provide the BMS team with greater autonomy to actually manage the system themselves. Once we're stable on that platform, this should open up new opportunities for us to look at new technologies or capabilities that the team might wish to use long term and plug into the BMS. Final one from me is the antisocial behaviour system. So IT will support the neighbourhoods team with gathering requirements and looking at our options for changing and upgrading what we currently have today, really focusing on what we need the system to do for us, and also what we need it to do for our external parties that we work with on this system, including the police and the emergency services. Again, this is primarily driven by the age of the current system and need to upgrade, and the vendor themselves holding some risk in that they are quite a small operation in comparison to some of the other system providers that we use. But rather than just do a straight black and white upgrade, it's important that we understand what functionality the users really need from it, and we in turn in IT can support the team with the wider engagement with those third parties and see what opportunities there might be to exploit some new technologies or integrate the system with the other ones that we use as best as possible.
Thank you, Mered and Marek. Now we're coming to questions and comments from colleagues before I sum up. Maria, any questions and comments from you?
No question, no comment.
Okay, thank you very much. Cal?
Yeah, I've got a few questions. First one is just a point of clarification that a resident had pointed out to me. I think I might know the answer, but I'll ask it anyway just for completeness. The figure that is associated with the Landport Courts improvements is listed as 1.5 million. That's previously been reported as a higher figure. Could you just explain why that is?
Yeah, I can't remember the exact figure, the total figure for the contract, but what's reported in the budget book is just the expenditure that's anticipated in that financial year. As you're aware, I think the project is about 130-week contract, so it goes over 2 financial years. So that's why the figures we've reported is higher than what's actually in the budget book.
Okay, thank you. Also, just picking up on a point that was made around the digitisation of tenancy records. Could I ask the question around asbestos records for properties? Because this is something that I've kind of dealt with in terms of casework of people asking the council whether there's asbestos in their property, and if so, where it is, so that they know if they're doing DIY, etc. Could we just clarify if records are held of which properties have asbestos in and where it is, and if so, whether that's old paper records or if that's been digitised and is available?
Yeah, so we do maintain an asbestos register. That's our legal obligation for contractors that are doing any work. So we maintain that, and that's digital, and we do keep a record where we've done surveys. What we don't have is where we may not have had surveys undertaken. So our responsibility is when a contractor goes in to do some work that we inform them of any known asbestos. If when they're doing the work, they're obviously trained to identify areas where there may or may not, where they would anticipate there to be asbestos, we would do a survey and we would keep those records. So we've got records where we've done surveys, but we don't necessarily have records where we haven't done a survey, if that makes sense. But we, again, if any resident has got any concerns, we do encourage them to come to us, and we can give them advice.
Okay, thank you. Just kind of quickly reflection on that. It's always been my belief that when someone's moving into a property, that we should be telling them whether there's asbestos in the property or not. And I speak from personal experience here. I moved into my flat and I wanted to put up a shelf and kind of thought, I better check, and asked the housing office, and they didn't know, so I had to send around the surveyor. So that was done. It just seems to me it might be good practice if we do have that information to let people know. Yeah.
Thank you, Carl. I think we've learnt that lesson. So we've just produced a leaflet, which is around for our new tenants when they're moving into a property, DIY, alterations, and asbestos. So we've created a leaflet and posters, so we will be talking to our new tenants as they come in, but it's also available for our existing tenants as well. So that's now out, and it's to all area offices, so we've just produced that.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you. Last question. This is something that we covered off previously in the briefing, but I think it's probably worth bringing it into the public domain. Obviously, there's works that are starting within the programme around decarbonisation and kind of address climate emissions that are associated with the properties within the housing stock. Could you explain if there's going to be a kind of longer term strategy over how we're going to retrofit the entire stock and over what periods and over what costs that's going to be? Because I can easily imagine it's going to be a lot of money, and it's something that we need to do kind of pretty urgently as a council.
Yeah, I'll take that one. Thanks, Carl. We refreshed the asset management strategy for the HRA last year, and in the forthcoming municipal year we'll be re-preparing the asset management strategy, and within that then we've got our plans then for decarbonisation, and that'll set out the cost of that works and the future programme that we were looking at. The item that I referred to in my report around the decarbonisation pilot is going to feed into that asset management strategy, because it'll give us the intelligence of how we can do that whole building retrofit. At the moment, we've been undertaking improvements to our properties for a significant period of time in terms of adding insulation to properties, cavity wall, loft insulation, etc., new windows, more efficient heating systems, etc. But the key thing is that in the asset management strategy that we'll be developing and publishing next year, in consultation with obviously our stakeholders, our residents, and with councillors, we'll set out clearer steps within that of how we'll look to achieve zero carbon.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks, Cal. Scott?
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. I'm just going to go through it. I've got a bit of a list here, actually. So if you go to Appendix A, Appendix A is 24.5 million, which is a significant sum of money in the revenue budget for the HRA. So I just want to know what sort of contingency we've got, because I'm looking at those numbers, and I think that with the way the world is at the moment, they're going to be a slight increase on what we're going to spend. And I always look at this budget and know that traditionally it's probably underspent. So I just want to know what contingency we've got in it, if possible. And I'm probably going to think that'd be Wayne to answer that question.
Yeah, so you're right, this is part of the revenue budget, and the housing revenue account at the moment has a £20 million reserve.
Okay, so it'd be the reserve would be propping up, but I think, if I'm correct, when we set the revenue budget for, I think it was 2 meetings ago now, wasn't it, and Councillor Sanders, that there would be a surplus of 28,000, which has probably already been eaten up with the current issues within supply chain. So I think we will probably be more than likely, if we do the 24.5 million, we probably will be dipping into that reserve. Is that correct?
Possibly, yeah.
I take the last bit you said as yes as the answer. Thank you. Okay, moving on. I'm just going to look at the Appendix B. So we go into Appendix B, and that is quite a telling table. If you look at the first, Appendix B is in 2 bits. You've got the capital programme heading, and then you've got the HRA capital programme heading on the second paper. Both papers are quite similar. I'm just quite interested in the top bit, and I think what Councillor Corkery said about asbestos removal is quite important as well. But again, there's £13 million been allocated for that. Again, we're having global supply chain issues, and you know where I'm going to ask again, Councillor Sanders, is I personally think that number is going to be very close to hitting that number, or even going over it with what's coming down the line, especially with I'm just looking at just what the marketplace is doing at the moment. So I just want to know obviously, are we going to be dipping it again into the HRA budget to fund more programmes?
So we have a separate ring-fenced capital reserve, the major repairs reserve, and there is an available around about 20 million on top of, once you've met all of the commitments that are mentioned in this report. So again, there's contingency there.
My reason I asked for that, Wayne, is because I think we live in a marketplace at the moment where there is considerable change going on, and I think this is something that I personally, Councillor Sanders, with your say-so, to be monitored as we go through the year, because I want us to be reactive to the changes that are coming down the market, because it might be the case that as a council we might have to look at doing things slightly differently, or changing our supplier, or changing, just being a bit more I think the word I want to be is proactive to what's happening in the marketplace, and it's more so to ensure that we're getting value for money for the taxpayer. So I think if possible we could do something over a 4 to 5 month period where we can bring back seeing how money is being spent, and if we are seeing increased costs in the supply chain especially. I see that Steve's writing stuff down, so I think that's a good sign. He's taken that on board. I'm just going to look into Appendix C, which I was really quite interested in. It was quite a good summing up actually. As well, especially on hardware. So at the moment, I've just written, obviously, we're going to be spending effectively what is £250,000 on additional hardware within our housing stock. I think it's not a bad thing. What I would look at is, personally, it's a lot of money. Are we going to be setting measures against it to see how effective spending money on these, for example, public access computers is a great idea. Can we just see how effective it is, how much time people use it? Is there a way to measure it? I know this is a department that does look at measures quite a lot in terms of everything that we do, and that's something that I personally would like to see, and I don't know if anyone can give me a commitment on that.
Any colleagues wish to answer that, James?
Yeah, I think in general terms we monitor the budget very thoroughly, and in terms of any particular spend on hardware in the areas that have been talked about from Merrick, we will be looking at how they're used going forward, and happy to share that detail through the informal briefings or throughout the course of the
I just think it's a good, we're spending a significant amount of money here, and I think it would be good to see how it's being used and how residents are using it, because it might be the case if it's there that we don't know it's there. It does say here in this report that it should be ready by the end of Q1, but that's probably like next week. So I just want to know, is it ready? Is it ready to go?
Yeah, so we've deployed all of the PCs. There's a few scanners which I think delayed due to the supply chain issues which you mentioned just before.
Brilliant.
So the phase one was to upgrade all of the hardware. We had some tight deadlines with regards to Microsoft extended support. Costs would have been astronomical for that. The phase 2 work we're looking at are things like sort of monitoring, if we can set up sort of better solutions in terms of kind of Citrix and remote desktop usage, so people can actually access it potentially not just from a public access computer but from their own device. Those are all things we're currently working on with the architecture team.
I think what you just said there about accessing it from their own device, I think is crucial, because then it doesn't have the need for people to go to the actual housing office. I think that's also, it's about making the resident feel comfortable and making our staff feel comfortable as well, so it makes life a lot easier for everyone. I'm quite keen to see how that moves forward, actually, so if you could keep us updated, I'd be really grateful. And lastly was just about the off-island programme. I mean, it's something that I noted, it's Appendix D. It's, I would notice it because it's in my ward, so I'm being a bit facetious here. It's just mentions about Northern Parade and Phoenix Square. It says obviously about a new dwelling and conversion. I'm assuming that is the old Kenvix building, Kenvix newsagents, that is going to be converted.
I hope so.
Yes, that's correct.
That is correct, thank you. I think that's a really good use of the site, actually, to be honest, because it's sitting derelict at the moment, so I'm really happy to see that in the budget as well. So thank you. No other questions.
Thank you for that, Scott. I have to say I'm impressed that Hilsea is off the island. I think some geographical readjustment is required. As far as I know, Hilsea is on Portsea Island, colleagues.
Look, off-island programme.
I have every faith that's happening, and I'm looking forward to the geographical readjustment very soon. So thank you for that, colleagues. Just a few observations, if I may. One of the things that I'm pleased this budget does two things. It's carrying forward the priorities that we as an administration have set out. Firstly is tackling both the climate emergency and the nature emergency that all councillors have put this council into, which I think is very, very welcome. I note Cal's comments about decarbonisation. He's not the first person who's mentioned it to me. The COP26 Coalition mentioned it to me. And that's why I was delighted to talk to colleagues to see how we could actually set out a strategy to decarbonise our social housing stock. It may be difficult, not least because we've got extensive depreciations coming down the line, but I'm delighted that work is going on to do that and delighted that that's going to form part of our asset management strategy. I think Scott's points about costs are very fair, and for those people who don't know, this afternoon the Cabinet assessed and noted a report on construction costs across the piece. Frankly, I think we as an administration are very concerned about volatility across a whole range of things. I mean, we're looking at things like oil prices, for instance, where there has been quite rightly, in my view, severe market failure because nobody wants to touch Gazprom, which is perfectly justified in moral terms. That is leading to severe volatility across the markets. We're seeing energy prices going up and down week by week. So there is volatility. I've got no problem about actually coming back and looking at budget monitoring, to be perfectly honest. But it is something we as an administration are very keen to let people know across the piece. I've probably learnt more about volatility in the cost of kitchens over the last year than I would have done before. But I think it is a very fair point about costs. We've got the council in a general fund to a position whereby we don't have to make any savings in the 22-23 financial year through our financial prudence. And I have got no harm in doing that, recognising that costs and volatility are important. So I've got no harm in papers coming back. I think you were after some sort of budget monitoring paper, weren't you, Scott?
Yeah, I think it would just be a sensible thing to do.
I've got no problems about that. I mean, I do recognise that there are all sorts of variables that exist within this, not just construction costs, but also pay costs as well, in the midst of the cost of living crisis. And I'm delighted that we've got contingencies to deal with that. And I think monitoring and reflections as we go along is something we as an administration are very keen on. I'm delighted that's been reinforced by Scott, and hopefully we'll get some budget monitoring papers back. I don't think we need to add that to the recommendations, but I look forward to seeing that at some stage.
To be honest, Chair, if you would like to add it to the recommendations, I would appreciate it. It is obviously in your gift, but I think it would affirm what we've actually asked for today as well.
Yeah. So, okay. I mean, are you okay with that, Cal?
Yep,
just to get some consensus around here. That's absolutely fine. So, Anna, can I then add recommendation 4, please, which is that a paper monitoring the performance of the budget against set spend is brought back to this meeting at some stage during the next financial year. And then I think we can get some consensus as to when and where. My preference would be 6 months, but frankly, given the energy price cap is going off in October, a report on October 1 when the price cap is going up massively on October 17 would be about as useful as a chocolate fire garden Sahara, in my view. So with that additional recommendation, I'm happy to do that. I'm happy that it's reflecting our priorities to have homes as green as possible and as safe as possible as well. So Mairead and Steve and Merrick, thank you very much for that. We now move to item 5, which is the private rental sector mediation pilot for Portsmouth. Who's going to do this one? Patrick is sounding far too keen, so please continue.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. The paper today is to present an update on the private rental sector mediation pilot, which has been in operation since May last year, and it's to ask for an extension of that pilot until the 31st of March 2023. The report provides the number of referrals to the pilot to date and also the cost of the scheme to date. The recommendations are that the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness notes the referral information and approves an extension of the mediation pilot until the 31st of March 2023, that the extension of the pilot is funded from the Homeless Prevention Grant in the sum of £10,000 for that financial year, that councillors are given the information they need to promote the pilot to their constituents, and that officers arrange for the pilot to be, the extension of the pilot, I should say, to be publicised through the usual channels and through colleagues and our partner organisations such as the PDPLA, the private sector resident association for the city. Just to bring you round to 3.2, some of the background on this is that this is part of the private rental sector strategy for the city. Action 2 in the strategy was to create a mediation service between landlords and tenants, and that was well supported in the consultation that we conducted in 2020. And it was approved by the Cabinet Member for Housing and Preventing Homelessness on the 25th of January 2021. We realised, having started the pilot in May 2021, using the Rough Sleeping Initiative grant, that an extension was required because there was low take-up at the beginning. So an original extension was approved until the 31st of December or until the funding was depleted, and that should be enough funding until the end of March 22, which has been the case. Referrals to the scheme, we've had 27 of those, and they're a mixture of referrals from landlords, from agents, from partner agencies, stakeholders and tenants themselves. And of those 21 referrals, under section 4.4 of the report, we can see that 21 have been completed and 6 are ongoing as at the date this report was drafted. Of those 21 completed cases, the outcomes are 15 have resulted in a positive outcome for the parties involved. In 3 of those cases, the intervention prevented the tenant from becoming homeless through eviction. 4 of those cases, the tenant actually moved without the requirement for an eviction. And we had 1 case where the behaviour in the home had been addressed, and that was a particular issue that a landlord and tenant had, which was resolved. The remaining 7 cases resulted in improved understanding and communication between landlords, agents and tenants, but of course in every case, we didn't get to an absolute specific or clear outcome, which is one of the reasons why we think that there should be an extension. And of the 6 completed that did not result in a positive outcome, it was because either the parties dropped out, didn't want to proceed, and in 1 case we did have a landlord proceeding with obtaining possession. And then we've got the 6 ongoing cases. Those are progressing, but outcomes for these cases are not available just at this point. The cost of the pilot to date is £3,520, so that's an indicative cost per case that has been dealt with of 130 per case. So in 4.7, we can see the pilot appears to have been successful, but we'd like more data, a bigger data set to do the analysis that we'd like to do, and I'll talk a bit about that further on in the paper. And then, as I mentioned previously in the recommendations, the £10,000 from the Homeless Prevention Grant would fund approximately 75 cases in the new financial year. If, as a result of the pilot being successful, then officers will come back to talk about how we would fund that in the longer term. The approach has been it's about building capacity in the sector, as well as dealing with actual referrals. So some of those cases where we've had discussions between landlords and tenants, if it's reaching an understanding and reaching dialogue and communication, then that will help build that capacity, and that's what we want to build on in the pilot. And then lastly, in section 6, the reasons for the recommendations are that we can examine a longer term financial model for the service should the pilot be successful, that we can look at integrating this work into a wider piece around accreditation, and Martin's here from the PDPLA, and we will talk to partners such as the PDPLA to see how that would work. But the most important thing, I think, from our point of view is more tangible outcomes, and that we give ourselves and the scheme time to get those outcomes. And in 6.4, I've detailed those, but it highlights some of them. It's around the number of evictions prevented. We've already seen that we had 3 in the first few months of the pilot. And then issues around disrepair, how effective that's been, what is the take-up from landlords, the take-up from tenants, how much does it cost per case, and the impact of that on the wider private sector housing community in the city. And that's it, I think, at this point, Councillor.
Patrick, thank you for that. Before I come to colleagues, just 2 points of clarification, which I have to say confused me. The first one is you mentioned the usual channels. Politics, that means whips offices in Parliament. What are you really talking about?
I should be more specific on that point,
yes,
Councillor. It's our social media channels and our website, right, and all of the things that we've done so far in the pilot. We want to reinvigorate those and make sure the message that if the extension is agreed by yourself, that information is out there, and that the more people as possible are aware of the scheme. Okay, that's fine. The other one was you mentioned up a pilot until the end of March 2022, or 8 days' time. I don't think we're going to be spending 10 grand in 8 days. Did you really mean March 2023? 23 for the extension. Excellent. Yes, Councillor, thank you. That's kind. Thank you for that clarification, Patrick. I realise it's 20 to 6, but such is life. Maria, did you have any comments at all?
Yes. I'm going on to section 4.8, and I think some of it's been partly answered, 4.9, 6.1. We're talking about putting in £10,000 of funding from the Homelessness Prevention Grant. Have you looked to find funding from other bodies, including the Portsmouth Landlords Association?
Patrick? Thank you. The answer to that question is not at this point. The money from the Homeless Prevention Grant is something that we've identified to enable us to conduct the pilot for another year. At that point, we will look at all of the options around making this self-sustainable as a project, as a programme for the city.
Because I just wanted to say that it's not just helping the council, it's helping the landlords. And I think it would be right to ask the landlords to put something in when that time comes.
Sorry, I don't normally interrupt, but I think I would certainly like to mainstream the service, but we need much more evidence than we have done at the moment. And I think there will be several discussions with several people around money. I think it's a case of what the best outcome is, but we haven't quite got there yet, as I will come back to when I sum up. But thank you for that point, Maria. Do you have anything else? That's kind. Scott?
And I think it's actually a good point that Maria brought about how this service is going to be funded if it is to be maintained longer term. I think the only issue I have about this is the current data set. It's not complete. I don't use the word poor because I don't think that's fair. I think the way I would look at it is it's in its early inception of where we want it to be. I mean, personally, if this worked, I think it'd be great, and I think the proof is going to be in the pudding, should we say, longer term. What I would like to see is I think the measures you're obtaining are quite sensible. Obviously, number of evictions prevented, how many cases of disrepair were resolved between landlord and tenant. I think that's all sensible things. But I think at the end of this pilot, it would be good to sit down with tenant and landlord and get them to actually review the service of how they felt that they were dealt with at that time, because that will tell us a lot more about the service itself and how we delivered it, rather than actually just going through a set of data and measures, because data and measures can tell us any story that we want. It's actually about how those people felt at that time, and I think that's important, because it's about the deliverability of the service, and by slightly getting the feedback from the residents and the Landlords Association as well, which I think is key, you're going to get a real sense of what works and what doesn't, and it might be the way that we've delivered that service at that time that we think it's really good, but actually they might come back and say, we didn't think this worked, this wasn't actually a good thing. Well, it got the end result, it's just about tailoring the service to everyone else's needs. And there's nothing really in there that says that about data and measures, and I think that's important, because we have lots of individual cases and they're going to be very different from the people that we deal with. I mean, I just don't see that in here at the moment, so I think if you could add that in, I think that would be a great idea. But also, it engages both entities. It engages the landlord and the resident all the way through the process. But that's the only thing I really have to add on it. I think I'm happy for you to spend the money, but I'm not happy for you to keep spending the money without identifying how you're going to spend it year on year. So I think it's a key thing to do, but obviously we need to see how it works first.
Thank you for that, Scott. I'll come back to that when it's my turn, in however long it takes for Cal to ask his questions, which can be as long as he likes.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, to start with, I agree with Maria's point about making the landlords pay. I think that's a good suggestion. My question is around how this relates to the other functions of private sector housing, and particularly with regards to their enforcement processes. So I guess what I'm asking is, will the fact that a case has been referred or is ongoing mediation, will that impact upon the council's ability or willingness to take enforcement action if that is appropriate? I.e., will they say, oh, well, no, it's going through mediation, we need to wait for that to be resolved? Or can the two things kind of run side by side where that is appropriate?
Patrick?
Yes, I think the answer to that is that those two things could run side by side. And I think the aspiration is that through dialogue we can resolve these matters, but it's certainly not something that should be done in isolation of the enforcement action that the council can take.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think that's answered my concerns. Obviously, there would be potentially a risk of things kind of not being addressed when they need to be if things were only being referred to mediation. But so long as we can be reassured that enforcement will continue kind of as and when appropriate. Obviously, I think this could be a good thing, and there will be cases where it will work. I just want to kind of guard against it being seen to take the place of other enforcement action the council might take.
Thank you, colleagues. From both of you, those are concerns that I share, frankly. I want to start with Scott's points, if I may. I want this to work, but if the evidence says no, and it's not working, it ain't going to happen. It's pointless spending money on things that clearly aren't working. The Department for Justice spent £500,000 on a court mediation service that did 9 cases across England. That clearly isn't working. That hasn't worked at all. That's what, 55 grand a pop. We're spending 130 quid a pop. That to me suggests it's slightly better value for money than the government scheme. But Scott is absolutely right. We need to make sure that the data works. And if this ain't working, this ain't happening. I want it to work because it is part of the overall, coming back to Cal's point, it's part of the overall package of trying to make the private rented sector easy and safer. Martin, Cal and the Cabinet, including me, were here this afternoon to discuss additional licensing, which is another part of the overall package of trying to make the private rented sector easier and safer. Many landlords are unhappy with the state of their tenants, many tenants are unhappy with the state of their landlords, and we want to make all landlords and all tenants be up there with the best. And I think this is an important part of it. It is delivering better value for money than the government scheme, which was abandoned last October. So I'm delighted we're still going with it. But I agree with Scott's points around actually trying to make sure it continues to deliver value for money and actually works. And I think once we have a better data set, which I would hope after the next 12 months, we'll be in a good position to do that. And if it ain't working, it ain't working. Is my view. Cal's points around enforcement are also very fair. This is a system, everything has to run in parallel and everything is based around individual cases. I don't think we can do a one-size-fits-all approach. Clearly, if there's mediation around a severe hazard, what's known in the jargon as a Category 1 hazard, then clearly that's what we've got to do. But I think the key thing is to try and bring people together, which is what we as a social landlord do, to try and sort it out. But recognising there's a slightly different power imbalance is something which I've said to landlords who've been involved in all this. There is more of a power imbalance than there is with social housing. With those provisos, I'm absolutely delighted to carry on. I think it's absolutely essential part of making the private rented sector easier and safer. I'm delighted we're offering more value for money than the government did, and I'm looking forward to hopefully coming back and saying we spent the 10 grand and can we have some more, please? But if it doesn't, it doesn't. But thank you, Patrick and colleagues. Thank you so much for the work you've done up till now. That's very kind of you. Right, we've got next the private sector housing fees and charges. And before, Paul. Sorry, what I wanted to do, as in line with the Cabinet this afternoon, is Martin wants to give a deputation on behalf of the Landlords Association on this, so I'll give Martin's deputation first, then come to you, Paul, to try and answer any questions that Martin poses, as well as your own presentation, if that's all right. Martin, fire away.
Having just finished the last item, can I make an observation or a comment?
You can do what you like.
I didn't want to comment before you made a decision, because it's not my place. Now you've made it. You know, one of my colleagues has been vehement on the need for mediation for the last 2-3 years at national and local level. And credit to you guys to have been so successful compared to the national underachievement. I'm not sure there's much to say other than I've always been very sceptical of mediation because no one's ever been able to show me success. I think you may be 3/4 of the way to solving all of my problems with mediation. And in answer to Maria's question, yeah, this 10,000 is for the other half of the pilot. If at the end of the pilot you can show that more than half the landlords that participate get a good deal for 130 quid, they're not going to have a problem paying it. Okay.
That's fine. Thank you. Thank you for that. You've still got time to talk about the fees and charges and your comments and thoughts on that.
I shall. I think it's 3 years now since we pointed out the need to break the charges into 2 parts and to separate out enforcement. So thank you very much for finally having done that. I think you're now legitimate and in line with the way the world is. That was the good news bit. Now let's have 10 minutes of the bad news. No. Looking at the proposed fees, you know, we're poor landlords, we can't afford it. To put it into context, a house in Southampton with a mandatory licence, I can get the licence for £290 if I use my own CIEH approved surveyor. If I use the council's to do the inspection, it's £650. But something that Southampton do that I think you guys should consider, if the application is more than 3 months late, i.e. we found you need a licence, they charge twice as much, almost twice as much. It's £1,100. So the key figure is I can get a licence in Southampton for 290, in Bournemouth 590, in Brighton 711, Guildford 880, Winchester 955, and right at the very top you're proposing 1150. And I've searched the country and I can find some London boroughs at the same sort of level, but nowhere else in the country needs to recover costs to the same level in order to administer a licence. So I'm not sure whether I'm challenging the fees or what. I'm just pointing out how extreme it is at the right-hand side of the spectrum compared to everyone else. And also on renewals, I think you're asking for £60 less than a full price, whereas, for example, in Brighton it's £265 less because there's so much less work involved in doing a renewal. So you're obviously going to approve an increase because you need to recover costs. I challenge the current proposal because I think the top line is too high. There are obviously inefficiencies in Portsmouth which others managed to work around or resolve. I'd really like to see a Southampton style, if you do your own inspections using a CIEH approved surveyor, it's cheaper, particularly knowing that most of your inspectors aren't CIEH qualified. You know, they've trained on the job and they've picked it up from other people. And I think half the problems my guys get is because you have young, bright, enthusiastic, over-eager people who've not done the proper training. They've just picked it up from the guy who's been doing it for the last 10 years. Lower renewal prices, because it can't be only 60 quid less to do exactly the same thing again. And if you could introduce a much more expensive late rate so that when you find a rogue, you slap the rogue and don't charge everyone else for the cost of all the pain that goes with it, I'd be very happy to support that. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Martin. Paul, if you could do the presentation and offer up some thoughts on what Martin has just said around the differences between local authorities, that would be very helpful.
Thank you, Councillor Sanders. First thing to say is this report was supposed to be presented by Claire Hardwick, who is unavailable today. So I'm going to try and fill in, and Sam Rickard is here to support. Also, one of the other managers in private sector housing who would have been able to answer any questions specifically related to the Home Improvement Agency fee part is also unable to be here. So the report is presenting the private sector housing fees and charges for next year, and looking to ensure full cost recovery, and the team have worked closely with our finance team to make sure that we're able to say that we have what we're proposing is a full cost recovery. There are three elements to the report. There are the fees within the Housing Home Improvement Agency fee. There is the licensing fee for HMOs and mandatory HMOs, and then the enforcement charges. I'll just briefly give a bit of information on each of those. So on the Home Improvement Agency fee, so we undertake disabled facilities grants work, and the administration, whilst the administration of that is a mandatory function, the provision of the Home Improvement Agency service is discretionary and therefore is a chargeable service, and the report outlines what that service is. It is a popular service, and whilst it's discretionary, 97% of the applicants take up that work. The service is currently charged at a flat 10% fee, and that is a fee which doesn't currently cover the full cost of providing the service. And DFG applicants are under no obligation to use the Home Improvement Agency service provided by the Council, and they can use an external service as well. The proposed new fee is set out in Appendix 1, and also is in line with a budget decision that was made on the 15th of February regarding a change in fees. One of the questions that's been previously asked is the impact overall on the amount of money that will be available for DFGs, and a question has come back to the Better Care Fund, which is going back in either April or May, about whether additional funding can be made available, which would mean that the total amount of money that would be available for customers wouldn't change. So we've got that proposal to them. The second area of change is the licensing fee, which Martin has talked about. I haven't got any figures to hand regarding specific fees in other areas, but what I would say is we're always going to be open to reviewing our fees and how we can, the model that we do that throughout the year. So we can have conversations with the PDPLA going forward, and if, as we go forward and learn, we find that there's other ways of doing it, or there's proposals for other ways of doing that, then we might come back in the future and we can look at an alternative model. So we're not, as officers, saying that this is the only model. This is the model that we're proposing for this year. So the Housing Act 2004 makes provision for us to recover the costs of HMO licensing, but local authorities aren't allowed to make a profit, and fees charged must be reasonable and proportionate. And as I've said already, with all of these areas, a financial review has been undertaken, and was found that we hadn't changed the fees for some time, and that we weren't achieving full cost recovery. So the proposals, as set out in Appendix 2, aim to do that. The third area is housing enforcement charges, and similarly there is a framework set out in Appendix 3, again been reviewed and looking to achieve full cost recovery on all of them. on all of the fees, what we're proposing is that we would come back each year with any proposed change to the fees, and that would be a decision that would come back to yourself. So the decisions are that we're recommending that you approve the changes to the fees in the 3 areas, and the process for bringing those for changing in the future. Happy to take any questions. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Paul. Maria, did you have any comments or questions at all? Sorry, Maria, could you just switch your microphone on just so it helps any people who might be hard of hearing?
Under section 5.2, there are currently 1,200 licensed HMOs. Do we have any idea at all how many are unlicensed?
Yeah, happy to answer that one, because that's a number that is quite fresh in my mind, because we had the report that came to Cabinet earlier today. So we think there's a total of about 6,000 HMOs in the city, so unlicensed would be about 4,800 is the estimate. We don't have an exact figure, but it's around that sort of number.
Thank you for that. And then under Appendix 2, is there any way that a prospective tenant can check if their landlord is actually licensed, registered, without it jeopardising their tenancy application?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer that. They can check that on our website. So planning will publish that information on our website, and it's available for anybody to look at.
That's kind. Cal?
I haven't got any further comments or questions. I think the report kind of speaks for itself in terms of covering the costs of the service.
Thanks, Cal. Scott?
Thank you. It's just on the point that I think Maria raised a good point about the amount of licensed HMOs and what do we know that are unlicensed. I think the problem, I mean, for my sins, I sit as a standing deputy on the planning committee, and I know that you yourself as well, Councillor Sanders. Do we actually look at what is licensed as a HMO, and do we actually work with planning to actually see if they've got the relevant permissions? Because it always seems to be a very not as joined up approach as I think it should be. And I think it's always quite convoluted to actually try and get any answers. I mean, what is the state of play with that at the moment?
The short answer is that they work to different legislation.
Absolutely, yeah, I know
so
that.
The legislation for planning is different from licensing. Yeah, we work closely with planning to understand what we can about HMOs. Obviously, if planning permission for an HMO might be different to whether that HMO is operational or not. So the things don't necessarily match up entirely.
Yeah, I mean, I can give you an example. I mean, I know, for example, I have an issue with a HMO in my ward, for example, and it's, let's just say that it's operating as a HMO, but it hasn't got the relevant planning permission to be a HMO. So, for example, we're talking about enforcement costs. Obviously, it will then come down to the nature of whether planning wants to enforce, or yourselves will want to enforce. The planning's actual answer to it was, we'll let them apply retrospectively. And I think the point that Martin made was quite sensible. If we know they're operating, why can't we hit them with an additional fee to do the retrospective application? I think that's a really sensible point that someone's brought up, because effectively they're not playing by the rules. And I think, I mean, this paper, while it does set out full cost recovery, and I accept that, but then I also actually said, so what is full cost recovery? Because I think the deputation that Martin's made actually today is quite sensible. I mean, he's talking about getting his own surveyors to do it, and it's much cheaper than getting ours. Well, I think that's actually a really good point, because we can actually free ours up to actually go and do some work for us, instead of having to worry about doing that. So the full cost recovery actually is going to be cheaper for us. Meredith can get his surveyors out doing work that he wants them to do. And it's not your lot, is it? No, it's fine, don't worry, somebody else's. So somebody else's surveyors can go out and do work they actually want them to do. But I think it's actually quite a sensible thing, and I think it'd also benefit the local economy, because they'll be using local people to do the work anyway. So I think there's another aspect to that, looking at from a cost recovery. I think we're not looking at value for money and looking at it from a different way. I think at the moment we're just keeping the money in the council, which I think is great, but actually we can actually help the local economy by doing it a different way and looking at other models. I think the late rate, that again I think Martin put, is actually a really good idea, because it will weed out the rogue landlords And I really quite like that. I think it's something that we should take away in doing. While we have the recommendations to pass these costings today, personally, I don't think you should. I think you should look at it again, just based on the fact that you've got someone here who has demonstrated of where things and how much things cost, and has given you an option for another way to do things, especially by getting their own surveyor to cut time, to cut the actual processing, to get it done quicker, and to make it more efficient. At the moment, that to me throws a spanner in the works of what this report's asking you to do. You know, because it's just giving you an example of how it can be quicker. And I'm not being funny, if it was me making the decision, someone's just giving me an example about how it'd be quicker, I'd be sitting there and going, maybe I'll have a look at this again. You know, the content of it is an acceptable report, and if you want to pass it, that's down to you. But you've been given an option now to say, could we do it a bit differently? And personally, I'd investigate that option. I think it's a really sensible thing to do.
Was that it? Sorry, I didn't want to shut you up. That's all right. So apologies.
That is it. I mean, I'm just, as I'm saying, I mean, I wasn't going to say anything until I heard the deputation, and the deputation was actually quite plausible and sensible. You know, and it's made me change my mind. So, in all honesty, if you can get value for money, better for the landlord, which then impacts on the resident, well, then will also impact on our services as well.
What would be the consequences of me agreeing? Essentially, it sounds like we've got five. I'll come back to. We've got 5 separate things to agree here, so I want to check and see where there are points of disagreement. But what is actually to? What would be a problem if I were to basically do whatever there is, whichever of the 4, because the 5 is an annual report, and I think we're all okay with that. Of the 4, I just say approve in principle, but have a review. What's the consequence, officer colleagues? Aside from panic.
The finance comments set out the implications of where we're under recovery and on full cost recovery. If we didn't change the fees, then we'd be going into the next financial year with if we carried on with the existing system until any changes, then we would be under recovering to the figures that are set out within the report.
Can I just literally jump in on that? It's going to say that because that is the processes that has been defined by this paper. What Martin has set out is how to do it slightly differently, so there'll be less processing time, so it will take out that cost. You know, it's looking at it a bit more commercially, you know, and I think that is what we're getting at here. It's the timing it takes to... time is money, isn't it? I mean, that's the reality of it. What I'm saying is, I'm not saying don't do the recommendation, I'm saying just take it away and look at it again, because I believe that there is a process issue where we could do this a lot quicker, and if that saves the council money, which I think it will, and it saves the landlord money, which will then impact on the tenants, everybody's a winner. I think passing it now would be the wrong thing to do. I mean, I'm quite happy for you to investigate. I mean, it's within your will to investigate whether we can do it in a more cost-effective manner for everyone, because it fundamentally does impact on us all, the council, the resident, and the landlord. So I genuinely have no issue with... If you want to pass it, it's fine. But I just think sometimes there is a better way. And the fact that we've got someone here who is clearly invested into this and knows what he's talking about, I think we should literally have to look at that and see if there is another way. If it's not, we'll come back and we'll pass it. But sometimes I think we act in haste and repent at leisure.
Wayne.
So we've got a revenue issue now, and we committed during full council that we were going to change fees in order to be able to recover the costs. If you don't do that, the decision of doing that now is you're going to be carrying that cost and that deficit position. You in the report it says that we're going to review these annually, so you could approve the decision now and then review it next year.
James.
Okay, I mean, firstly, I think the fees that we're proposing need to take effect from the 1st of April, and what you're being presented with is a rationale as to why this paper comes before you now, and it will create some stability in the fee structure going forward. We've heard, for the first time here, a proposal about an alternative model, which seems quite sensible. We know the PDLA speak for some landlords, not all landlords. So if you're minded to, I don't think it jeopardises the position to say, well, based on the evidence in this report, you're going to take a decision and then instruct officers to work with the PDLA, as we should naturally do in any event, and look to see if there's an alternative model. As Paul said in his presentation of this report, it is possible for the model to be adapted and refreshed throughout the course of the year. I think we just need to be very clear that if we don't make this decision, or sorry, if you don't make this decision now, it leaves us in